right. Welcome back, everybody, to another Future Focus, where we are living at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. Today, we're going to be talking about the apocalypse. And I'm not talking about nuclear fallout or anything like that. We're going to be talking about just the overload of apps and technology out in the market right now and what it means and what do we do about it? Because it can be overwhelming for even the most technologically savvy person. So to navigate that conversation, I'm joined by Andrej Safundzic. Am I close on that one?
Yes. No, you're good. You're good. It's Andrej Safundzic,
Okay.
so it's good.
All right. See? All right. Well, and I'll just call you Andre from here on out, but I at least like to take a stab at it. And I had a guest once from Finland, and the Nordic, they're just white dude from the Midwest, not going to be able to get that accent going. So that's the one guest I've had where I couldn't even come close. So thanks for joining me, and I'm looking forward to our conversation on this one. But for folks who may not be as familiar with you, let's give a little bit of context and background into who you are, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. So my background is the following thing. I'm right now the CEO and co-founder of Lumos. Lumos is an app management platform founded in San Francisco. But my whole story is all around finding industries that have a story worth telling that nobody honestly is kind of focused on. So it all started with my first two companies, which were two edtech companies in East Africa. So I had a friend in Uganda, and he said, youth unemployment is the biggest thing here. In fact, in Uganda, 70% of all people are unemployed, right? Or like they're necessity entrepreneurs, like they're necessity entrepreneurs, selling stuff on the street, right?
Okay.
My first two companies were all about, we built it's still around, the biggest cross university incubator for startups, where we kind of equip students with some skills and capital to build their own thing and hopefully go from single entrepreneur to multi person startup. So that's first,
doing more than just kind of making it through the end of the day.
Exactly, right. And creating jobs, right?
Building it into a company that provides for more than just the individual who's doing the work.
Exactly. So that was the first one. So that was the story all about like this, the unemployed, a necessity entrepreneur becoming hopefully building an SMB, right? Then after that, I was like, one of the institutions that impacted me the most. I'm the oldest of five. Both my parents were immigrants from Croatia and to Germany, right? And the government was so impactful to us. We got childcare benefits, free education, free healthcare. I wouldn't be here in Silicon Valley without them, right? And so I built this with my two colleagues, Sonia and Christina, this govtech company, right? We got acquired by the German White House, the German Federal Chancellery, as the first startup ever to be acquired by the German government. And
really?
Now, the tech task force of the German, government, which is, we bring the smartest people. They usually, say like, oh, the government is slow and bureaucracy and stuff like that. We bring them in and they build impactful, tech products for the public good. Right. So the story here was all around the civil servant who's like seemingly gray and slow, but actually not. Because with technology and amazing people, you can do amazing things. Right.
Yeah.
And then, I did my computer science, bachelor's at Technical University of Munich and Harvard. I did my master's in computer science and my MBA at Stanford University. And then, I started, Lumos, which is, all around IT. Which is like, IT used to be the technologist 25 years ago, but they seemingly lost the identity, right? And so
they did. There was like, you used to, when you said you were in IT, it's like people knew what you did. There was like an identity that went with it, and that has changed.
It has changed. So, long story short, to kind of sum it up, now I'm focused on, this persona called IT and transforming them into this new age.
So have you always had, I mean, obviously you're on your third tech company, which is impressive. Have you always just had that tech? What was driving you to go down these paths? I mean, obviously they're different sectors that you were focused on, but obviously you saw a problem and you were like, I'm going to solve this with technology. Was technology just always your comfort zone, or was it just you were determined to solve the problem and technology was the best path to do it? Like, how did that work?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, my life philosophy is, Richard Branson's called "Screw it, just do it," right? Which is, no,
Love
but
that.
it's actually true because here's the thing:
Yeah.
humans, if you think about us as cavemen, we are risk averse because, like, we see the
Yeah.
tiger and we're like, oh, or we hear a sound which might not even be a predator, we run away, right?
Yeah.
So I believe we as humans are by nature risk averse
By default.
by
Yeah. By
default,
default, we just run away from these things or
right?
do whatever we can to just kind of hunker down.
Exactly, exactly. And so I'm like, you know, to combat that, let's put 20% of risk to every decision that I'm making, at least for my personal life, right?
Okay.
And so that often leads to the world of entrepreneurship. Even though I've never said like, oh, I want to become a founder. That's never the case. You usually want to kind of,
Okay.
find a problem, and then sometimes you team up with someone. And for me, it was just happened that I started a company. Now, the second thing
Okay.
is, so that's the first philosophy. The second philosophy is I love books, fiction books. And it's all
Okay.
about this character development of a persona, right? If you think about Frodo, Frodo, why we love Lord of the Rings is, of course, the world building, but also about this persona called Frodo that goes through this, tribulations and comes up, as victorious, right? And
Yeah.
I
And
believe
kind of discovers who he is through the process. You're kind of on that journey with him.
that character development, right, is the beautiful thing of who he is. Exactly. And so, I'm not, the best at writing novels, but I'm good at building technology. And, I want to, do that to kind of, create legit modern stories, and that's why I picked the civil servant. That's why I picked the unemployed, young adult in Uganda. And that's why I'm picking now, IT, because, some people tell Captain America stories, which are equally valuable, right? Of like the victorious hero, becoming even bigger. For me, I love
Yeah.
love tackling personas that are trying to find themselves, right?
Okay.
And those are the two things: story, just do it, plus story led, persona led, company building, which kind of brings it all together.
I like that. No, well, and that's why it's always fascinating when I talk to folks who have been on the show to just kind of get the backstory. And it's funny because sometimes even they don't see it. They're like, well, I did this. But listening to the story, I'm like, nope, I see how that fit in with this and then how that all pulled together. So that's super cool. Now, we're talking about this whole helping IT really, in many ways, find their identity and figure out what this looks like, which I I'm curious your perspective on this. But as I look at SaaS's and apps, that really massively disrupted how companies thought about technology. I mean, I remember the days when products as a service really came onto the market. And it was like, I mean, I knew a lot of people in IT that were like, wait a minute, this was kind of like what we did. We kind of like managed and maintained and built and did all this. Now people are just buying these off the shelf things. Same with apps. It was like you used to have an internal, even app department where they would write this, and all of a sudden it was like, well, we can just do it faster over here. And I saw some of that existential identity crisis. I've seen it over years where it goes, well, what is our role in all of this? But I'm curious your take on that because we're talking about their role, but I've also seen the impact that that's had on the end user as well. And I'm curious your take on both of those.
Yeah. So first of all, before we talk about like the change, one thing that is
Yeah,
important is that change is constant and beautiful, actually. Think about, the car
true.
manufacturing industry, right? In the past, workers in the factory, actually, my dad is a mechanic, right? He
Okay.
creates, windows, right? In the past, he had to do this, manually. Now he has CNC machines, right?
Yep.
Next, robots will do this, automatically, and he'll be able to oversee those robots and just like fine tune them, right? So
Yep.
we're moving more and more to strategic work, right? The
Yep.
car, if you look at a Tesla factory, looks completely different than a Volkswagen factory 40 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
important thing is that
I just watched on that topic. I just watched a short documentary with my kids about the history of Lego
mm,
and the journey they were on, and
mm,
how they evolved from building wooden toys by hand to then they found this press molding machine that was still hand done. Then it evolved. And like now you look at it and you look at the manufacturing shop floor in the Lego factory, and there's like a couple people just kind of making sure it's a different world than it was 30, 40 years ago. But to your point, it's always that way. It's not like, oh, this one thing happened and then the world changed.
Exactly. And so it's a good thing that change happens, and now we need to adapt to it. Now,
Yeah.
if we look now into the corporate office, right? So we talk now about the manufacturing world. If you think about like now the corporate world, right? Change happens also all the time. Think about this. Um, DBT Labs is actually a good company. They're like kind of a data company. And before there were data analysts. So basically what data analysts did is, they took a lot of data and created reports. There was like, because, a lot of technology abstracted that work out, they were able to shift
Okay.
left, right? And DBT
Okay.
Labs was able to create a new persona called analytics engineer, which is all about, this data analyst having now the capabilities to actually engineer stuff, build models, etc., because they have new technology for that. So they shifted left in terms of getting more technical, right? Getting more into
Okay.
the engineering mindset. Now, the same thing happened with Figma and product designers. Product designers used to be UI designers that kind of on Photoshop, scribbled,
Oh, okay.
UIs. Now
Yep.
with Figma, they're collaborators. Now, we're going to talk about like what is the change that IT is going through, right? And so there are kind of three stages of this. So the first stage was digitization. So that was like in the late 1990s, Oracle, SAP, IBM, Microsoft create like those massive behemoths of CRM systems, etc.
Yeah.
What was IT's role there? IT's role there, they were the hackers. They were the network. Like they kind of built the whole data warehouse, the data centers. They hacked those things together. They made sure that people can actually digitize their office, right? So they were
Yep.
the innovators that brought technology in, right? So that was stage
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
That was stage one. They were actually more of engineers, I would say. Then stage two was the consumerization of enterprise. Think about Zoom and Figma and Datadog and Slack. IT honestly wasn't as necessary anymore as with like an Oracle or an SAP, because like a person could just like spin it up themselves.
Yeah. It definitely was a different phase. I think and I'm curious your take on this, because that's where I saw, at least my observation was, yes, there was this change. And because IT was still stuck in what it had done before and hadn't transitioned to this new role, you often saw this, like you said, people would go out and go, well, I don't need IT for this. I can just get this app and I can just, and unfortunately, what I still observe is some of that strategic system architecture, like thoughtfulness into it, got lost. And so you had people who were not technical architects making technical decisions, not understanding even what they were doing, because IT was over here going, well, that's not really our space because we're too busy doing this other stuff. And it's like, well, but actually, and it's created massive problems.
I think you summarized the problem. This is actually amazing what you just said. I really mean it. Here's the problem. IT focused on the few apps that they actually owned, right? And not on the hundreds of apps that other people just spun up. And then
Yep.
suddenly IT just got swamped with tickets from other teams.
Yes.
Oh, now I spun it up. Actually, can you resolve this IT ticket? And so suddenly
Yeah.
the IT person, moves from an, let's say, network engineer, what they were before, to like an IT analyst, mostly, resolving tickets, right?
Yeah, they're a
Now,
technical problem solver on a thing that they didn't have any involvement in setting up. And now it's like, hey,
exactly.
we made this mess. Can you fix it for us? And they're like, how did we even get to this point? And it's like, well, because you didn't make that shift.
And here's the important thing. Now the third shift is happening. So we moved from digitization, Oracle, SAP, to consumerization, Zoom, Figma, etc., to now autonomous software. GitHub Copilot, Grammarly, and all those things are just the beginning. At some point, you'll,
Yeah.
not Lumos, the office will look more and more similar to like our Tesla factories, where AI will do work for us. Now, here's the cool thing.
Yep.
IT can actually change their mandate. Now, there's a new shift,
Okay.
and with new shifts, you can change your mandate. And the mandate can be, instead of being called a system administrator, which is like, oh, let me administer a system, I think they should call themselves tech ops strategists or tech ops engineers or
Okay.
tech ops architects. Why?
I would agree with that.
DevOps what is DevOps to full stack engineers? Full stack engineers do the work. DevOps gives them the infrastructure to do the work, right? The
Yep.
same thing I think IT needs to do, like tech ops, DevOps, tech ops. They give the technology infrastructure for all those teams, whether it's in IT's responsibility or other people's responsibility, to do the work
Yeah.
with all this new automation that's happening.
Okay. It's so funny you bring this up because this ties very much to one of the discussions that I have a lot in my industry, specifically around learning and skills. Because right now, just in
Mm,
general, the large portion of the workforce is in complete upheaval right now as people are going, what is it that I even do here anymore? I'm not sure what my role is. Everything's changing. What is AI going to do? What do I do? And to your point that you made earlier in the show, our tendency when that stuff happens is to try and hunker down and just do what we're comfortable with and
mm,
kind of go into this zone of this is what I did before. I'm just going to death grip onto it and hold tight and hope that I can make it through. And unfortunately, that's usually not the best path to take
mm,
because not only does it reach a point where you become obsolete, because it's like, I mean, and I see this even in certain fields right now where it's like, well, if that's what you're going to keep doing, we actually can have AI do that better than you can. Like
mm,
the actual task itself, it's far more efficient, it's far more effective. We don't need you involved if that's what you're going to do.
mm,
But I also think of the business shift that actually the business loses out when people don't start to adopt this change. Because going back to the software system example, all of a sudden you had people buying SaaS products on their P cards left and right. And there wasn't this strategic governance overseeing it going, how do these pieces fit together? How do we make sure that we're architecting the right ecosystem? We're making sure people's needs are met, that if this group is really being enabled by this, we can make sure this other group also gets that same benefit. People aren't moving to that higher order thing. And the business actually loses out in the process.
I agree with that. I agree. I mean, like, you are the learning and professional development and superstar and guru, right? You've probably seen this all the time, in massive corporations that you were part of, like GE and like now your current organization, where probably like all roles are shifting, need to shift and reinvent themselves to some extent. I mean, think about it. Many people in customer support, that's use case number one for AI right now, are doing more and more through chatbots, right? Automated. So
Yep.
now you need to like kind of rethink about like, hey, this is actually, some people might be afraid of this or saying like, oh shit, I'm gonna lose my job, but there's way more
Lots
opportunity.
of people are thinking that right now.
Yes, but
But they don't have to your point. It doesn't have to be
exactly,
that way.
exactly. So what's kind of the change? Like, think about it in IT. Would you rather, you know resolve tickets of hey, reset this, my laptop broke, or
Yeah.
reset this password? Or would you rather think about systems and the infrastructure so that teams can help themselves, right? It's kind of a higher level and more rewarding type of work, I would say.
Well, that's just even going back to the customer service example with this, and I think this is where we are in a weird stage where I think in many regards, we don't really fundamentally understand the work. And so we're trying to make sense of, well, what do we need people doing? What do we need technology doing? How do these things fit together? But even in the customer service one, I don't know if you know about the Air Canada example,
Yep, yep,
but
yep.
companies kind of quickly just said, oh, we'll just have AI do our customer service. Well, it can work to a certain point when it's on a very transactional level, but there's a certain level of complexity where you actually need somebody who has context and critical thinking skills to be able to start working on some of these things, so you don't end up in a situation where you're like, oh no, our AI did what? And you're like, well, who can fix it? And you go, I have no idea. And I think about that in the technical world. There's lots of disruption around computer and software engineering because these large language models can write code, all this other stuff. And I've seen companies go, well, what do we need people for? We can just have the machines write the code. But they're failing to see that you need the people to troubleshoot and understand how those pieces fit together and do all this stuff. Otherwise, you're going to write a bunch of stuff that you don't even know if it's the right thing. And when it breaks, you won't know how to fix it. It just makes bigger, harder messes to clean.
And keep training the model. Yeah. Okay, here's one example from the field. So one thing that Lumos does is we help with onboarding and offboarding to systems, right? Lumos is an access management platform, and Lumos can say like, hey, you can configure certain rules. Hey, if you have this title, you get this. Or you can go into Slack or into a UI and pick, you're an onboarded employee, and you can pick like, I need AWS and I need this permission in AWS. Okay. Now, how is this going to change with AI? With AI, how this is going to change is AI, now people won't need to kind of maintain certain on and offboarding rules anymore, but AI will propose, a new account executive function opened in South America. Let's assume that, right?
Yep.
For this account executive, we found this title in Workday, for this on your HRIS system. Now for this title, they should have this access, this access, this access, and that access, right? Now, instead of IT or the tech ops, a person setting up, those rules themselves, AI will do this automatically, right? But then they need to troubleshoot it, saying like, actually, they just got sensitive access to the system. We shouldn't have given this flag, and the system will learn, right? That is, I think, how you'll probably optimize. Instead of you'll optimize the system to reach a certain metric, and the metric in this case is time to resolution or employee CSAT, right? Something like that.
Well, and even in the example you just shared there, and I think it's just helpful for people because the number of people I talk to who are just going, I don't know how this is all going to come together. And I think these examples help people go, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like I'm starting to understand. Because even in that example, so let's say artificial intelligence can detect, hey, there's been a new group set up, this new thing. It looks similar to this. Maybe we should follow this similar thing. It does not have all the context. And I think the other thing that's huge as this change happens is there are the interpersonal relationships that you need to have to be able to understand that context. So, well, why did this happen? What are the things that aren't just the tactical? Yeah, this group got set up, but like why? Who's involved in it? What are the different guidelines around this? To your point, so that you can fine tune these things. Because again, I can just say from my personal experience, while AI might be able to automate all that, you wouldn't just want to hit the easy button and just let it go and be like, I'm sure it'll be fine. You'll end up making
it's similar to Waymo, right? Where Waymo had at the beginning, a driver first and the driver did the driving, right? I think we'll see this in corporate app. And corporate, like, IT will need to be the driver. Here's another example to kind of just like exemplify it. We are going to launch an AI that will automatically remove licenses, right? Everyone's trying to save money, right? There are a lot of licenses that are given out to people that are unnecessary.
Oh, and this costs companies millions of dollars, if not billions a year, where it's just like, we have these things, this person hasn't used the app in who knows how long, and it's just sitting there, but nobody ever has the time to just go back and audit all this stuff and find it. It's just, it's never going to, you never have time.
It's impossible. Like, think about it. It's impossible because you have, let's say 500 apps. Let's say you have 5,000 employees, but then within each app, sometimes you have a pro license, sometimes you have an edit license, sometimes you have a free license. So it's really hard. Now, this is literally something that happened recently. Okay, let's just remove AI, find out, who hasn't used it in X number of days and remove the license, right? For Zoom, let's say. Now, suddenly it turns out that the CEO, actually the assistant is booking meetings for them, right? And so the CEO never does it themselves. And so now the CEO suddenly, it was an important board meeting and the Zoom meeting shut down in 40 minutes. Now, even though they recovered, let's say 500 licenses.
That's a legit one that happened?
That happened once. And so even those two, the 500 were saved, got like, because the CEO,
the one that you made the mistake on cost a lot.
Exactly. So now you had to kind of tell the AI, okay, listen, if it's a service account, which means like, hey, if it's part of what is it called, a meeting room, right? Like it's
Yep.
called conference room X, never remove it. And if it's a VP and above, never remove it,
Right.
you
At
know?
certain roles or certain things, we're going to put in the dials and the guardrails to say, hey, let's put some thought into this. And even when you get to that point, to your point from before, you still need people who are in the context, know what's going on, know what's happening to be able to continue fine tuning those dials. Because again, with the pace of change, it's never a set it and forget it and be like, well, this is what it was a year ago. I mean, honestly, I do a weekly update. And with the pace of how fast things are moving, you can't ever just set and forget really anything.
Exactly. And so that's why I'm saying is like, IT, what I, if CIOs, so even CISOs think a lot about security analysts, which try to find alerts and then, resolve them. I would kind of think about like, hey, you should move away from this world of, analysts or like, problem solvers, but more system optimizers. That's why, this new
Okay.
tech ops, that's why I love the word tech ops, because it's all about improving the operations instead of
Yep.
improving the problem itself. You need both, right? But the system improvements, what we just talked about the last 10 minutes, are sometimes forgotten, I think.
It's funny though you talk about this because I think this goes back to what we're seeing societally in terms of change along work, because this isn't, well, we're talking about the technical implications. Anybody who listens who goes, well, I'm not in IT, it doesn't matter because all of these things are transferable to just about anywhere.
Exactly.
Because I've even seen in my industry that this operational excellence is really this elevated role that everyone is starting to play, where it's less about being in the details and the weeds and troubleshooting all this stuff as it pops up, and more being like, okay, how now I'm overseeing this. Where can I continue to optimize and refine and fine tune? And what kind of adjustments can I make? Which is actually a better place to be. I mean, honestly, when I think about where I want to spend 8 hours of my day, I would much rather spend it looking at these, fine tuning, making adjustments here on the higher order activity than being down in the details, dealing with 800 tickets on something where you're like, well, this isn't really necessarily adding tremendous value.
I agree with this. I agree with this. And we see this, all over it. I mean, think about customer support, right? There are two kind of transformations in the last 15 years that happened with customer support. Number one, customer support split out into customer support and customer success. And customer
Mhm.
success became this thing of like, hey, let me think about what value can I create for the customer, right? And have
Yeah.
conversations and quarterly briefings and like figure out. Now, customer support will split again into still customer support and customer support operations. I think that will become more and more of a thing where you'll have AI and then you'll have very, capable support, engineers or support, analysts that actually kind of improve the operations of your systems,
Yeah. That are
right?
looking over at all these bigger trends, these macro trends, and going, what's actually going on here? So that, and again, I think back to the interpersonal and the interrelational, cross functional relationship piece, where if you're that tier two customer support, you're now looking for the trends and the identification piece and knowing, hey, I need to go talk to the product team because I'm seeing this consistency in what's going on with the customers. We should just fix the product rather than trying to put the fires out all the time. And I think back to historically, and this is the part where when people get nervous about AI, I think the thing that I often tell them is if you're just thinking about how AI is going to do more of what's in the box, it can be scary because you're like, well, if AI takes more of what's in this box, there's less for me to do. But if you think about it more as AI is expanding the box, it's like, yeah, it's taking up more of this stuff, but it's also creating the space because going back to some of these things we've been talking about, it's not that people never thought they should do this stuff. It was just one of those like, when am I going to find time to do that? I'm so busy taking care of all this
You
other
can be
stuff.
more
I don't have
creative.
time to do that.
Yeah, you can be more, you can kind of spend more, the boxes, you can do more creative, meaningful work. Let's take about, where AI disrupting as well, apart from customer support and IT is graphic design, marketing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so now instead of, before you kind of went into Illustrator and create those, ads and stuff like that, right? And actually we looked at this and we were like, man, we were able to just launch a new ad rotation. What that means is like a new set of ads every 6 weeks. Let's assume that, or 8 weeks, because it takes a lot of time to create like ads for Google
Oh,
Display, SEM, and stuff. Now we're like, man, with now Mid-Journey and all those kind of things, we can kind of release a new ad set every 2 weeks, and I can actually test out more things, and I can actually, A/B test things faster and problem solve things faster, and it's pretty cool, to kind of identify. I have more data to identify trends. A friend of mine here in Silicon Valley, he started an AI company that, in this case for e-commerce, it's called CoFrame. He's called Josh Payne, that automatically changes the words on your website, right? And the
okay.
A/B tests, the words, what will kind of lead to more conversion. Now you can say like, man, I don't need to come up with all those hypotheses. All I need to kind of see is like, look at the trend and make
Less
this.
time in a conference room arguing about wordsmithing stuff and going, what if, and you're like, I don't know. Now it's just like, just screw it and do it type of it, where it's just like, just go do it. Like, just make it happen. And then let's get the data back and then make decisions based on that data instead of sitting here hypothesizing.
Exactly. So I'm really excited about the future, to be honest.
So as I think about this, though, and I'm curious your take. Well, and the other thing before I go to this, I think the point that you just made there, because again, I deal with a lot of content creators. And again, this change can feel very disruptive. Oh my goodness, we've got AI creating images, we got AI creating videos, we got AI doing all this other stuff. What is the role that I play in that? But I even think back to, like your example, times where I've been working with somebody who's been working on building some sort of either communications campaign or something like this for different. There was always this, well, we just have to cast the widest net because we can only do so much. We only have this much capacity. And that was challenging for them because it was like, well, so now we're trying to get it perfect. But I think what I've seen is it's not only even about going to market faster with that, but also saying maybe we still go to market with the same time. But now instead of casting one wide net, what if we personalize this? What if we reach people and target people in different ways? So instead of going, all right, we're going to spend 6 weeks crafting the perfect campaign, getting the words just right, and hopefully it resonates with everyone. Instead, they can go, it's still going to take 6 weeks, but now we're going to go, what audiences matter most? And let's personalize the campaign to them this way. And let's think about this group over here. And let's make 8 different versions of this and hit it out like that.
Let's make it matter to you.
Let's make it matter to you. And it's like, they love what they do now. Where before, when this first started, they were looking at it going, well, what am I going to do here? If I'm not creating the campaign, I'm just going to be out of a job. And it's like, actually, no, now they're actually working on these, but they've had to accept that the work was different.
Yeah.
Because I also know some folks who were like, no, I'm going to keep doing it the way I've always done it. And they're struggling.
I agree. So you can, number one, I see actually 2 trends. Number one is you can make it more meaningful to a certain person, right? Because you don't need to kind of think about the busy work at the beginning in itself, right? But at the same time, you can think about originality, right? Many people are like thinking about worried about like, hey, AI crafting everything, could this lose, or could it become less original? There's a way of that might happen, but you also have maybe more time, to think about how to make things more original, adding your extra this extra bit of beauty to your creation. You'll have think about this is especially in this world where things are on deadlines, right?
Yep.
Everything is done on a deadline, but at the same time, we care about a craft, right? If you can just like compromise, how fast you can get, something out, you have like more time to actually add more beauty and more, flavor to something.
Yeah. Well, and I just think about, as a personal example, I am not a graphic designer by any means, but I often create graphical assets for some of the things that I do. And it's not the kind of thing that, I could ever hire a graphic designer for, because I don't have that kind of finances or resources or things like that. But actually, I've seen AI help expand my creativity, because now I can say, here's what actually is in my head. Here's what I'm trying to do. I don't actually have the skills to hone that exactly the way I want, but I know what I'm looking for with this. And now I can do it in ways I couldn't before. So I actually see, and even the people who are in the creative space, I actually know some fantastic graphic designers who actually say, I am more creative now with AI because instead of going, what you're asking me to do is just too hard, or it would take way too much time. Now I can do it so much faster. Or if somebody wants to make an adaptive change where before I would go, I'd have to start back over from scratch from this whole thing. It's actually allowing them to expand their creativity by removing some of the mechanical robotic work that is underneath them.
Yeah, and for example, bringing back to IT is that this is actually a good example. Before, let's say IT had a mandate, let's say last year in 2023, remove costs, right? Let's say
Yes.
there was one of the mandates. They have many mandates, like
It was a mandate on probably most IT leaders that I know.
and even like engineering leaders,
Yep.
remove, reduce AWS costs, right? Now
Yeah,
IT,
well, and going back to it, I'll let you continue. But going back to it, this was a real thing because of what we saw over the past few years, where there was this apocalypse, where it was like everybody just created apps and bought new tech and all this stuff, and then all of a sudden it was like, well, wait a minute, what do we need to do about this? And so there was this kind of cosmic reset.
exactly. And now here's like, let me tell you the before and after, the before, now, and after.
Okay.
Before, what IT had to do is like, okay, let me download a sheet of all users. Let me actually look up this with the HRIS system, which users are terminated. Let me actually look into like which users haven't used it. And they had to go back into the system and remove those that they deemed that don't need the license anymore. That's before. Then now is like, you can build workflows. Lumos offers this, for example. You can build workflows and automatically remove licenses, right? When they haven't been used. But the future is all about, actually the AI already does this work. Now the CFO gave me all the budgets, all the software budgets of all my department heads, and I actually identified that the head of marketing is over budget. Now I was able to creatively problem solve, because I heard that the head of marketing actually wanted to launch this big campaign and it was $1 million short, right? And I saw, actually, when I dig a little deeper, I became a consultant to them, and I dug a little deeper, and I saw that they have 3 duplicate apps for surveying. They use survey tool 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
And in
They've
fact,
got Qualtrics, Quantum, and they've got Survey Monkey, something like that.
exactly. And in fact, even like for this other tool, like they are overpaying it. I have this database of like, and they're overpaying for this. Actually, let me consult with them, because my automation does all the, busy work I did before. But now I have the data to consult with them to kind of help them solve, the challenges that they have with their budgets, right? So you see how this kind of changed from manually to like letting automation do its thing, to now, hopefully with AI doing the heavy lifting, to do like more consultative work. Like this is like, I think, how IT, with an example, might change and might become more creative in their pursuit.
No, I actually think this is really great that we're breaking through some of these use cases, because different industries go through these changes at different time periods and paces. And I feel like the IT, the tech side of the house, has probably been hit exponentially harder than other functions in the knowledge workspace as of recently. But it goes back to this whole one. I think we've painted a picture of a much brighter future than many people realize. That it's like, yeah, it's different, but it's actually really exciting where this is going. And this also should be an encouragement to everybody else, because the reality is, I still talk to some people who go, yeah, but this isn't coming for me. What I do is so different and so unique that this isn't happening. And the reality is, as I watch the pace of change, it's like, no, every single person, I can't remember, I was on a podcast the other day where I said, every single person is going to be affected by this. Your job will be disrupted in the next few years in some capacity. Now, the question is, what are you going to look like on the other side of this? And are you going to sit back and wait for it to happen to you? Or are you going to get in the driver's seat and say, I actually see an opportunity to shape where this goes?
How do you, like as a chief learning officer, right, is like, how do you, what do you usually consult like leaders, let's say in more customer facing orgs, which is, like a support function, HR function, an IT function, right? They're, facing, a certain persona. Like, how do you see, probably the learning plans have been totally, L&D plans, have been totally, like people are like, what should we do now? Like, what is the biggest change that you've seen?
Yeah. So I think this goes back to something I would say is we fundamentally misunderstand work. And we don't often know what actually goes into things. Now, I think we've described a few things here where, we kind of can on the big buckets understand like these things are happening in these jobs. People are in general doing this stuff. I think what's been interesting from my seat is watching how little we actually know the skills and behaviors that go into doing those things really well.
Mm,
And so what's happened is all this change has come in, all of a sudden people are going, okay, so even in our example, so let's say customer service starts to move into this kind of higher order problem solver, putting people, what actually makes somebody good at that?
mm,
Because we really have never had to unpack that before. It was just kind of like, well, you just put a person that has experience in customer service. We don't really know what they do, but we know that that's how it goes. Where now we actually have to deconstruct that and say, what actually makes somebody really good at that kind of problem solving and those interpersonal relationships? And
mm,
how do we define those things? And then how do, like for Andrej, how do we actually create a path to say, you're really good at this, but to be successful in this next future, these are the kind of decisions you're going to have to make, or these are the kind of
So it's
relationships you're
similar.
going to have to
Okay,
build.
so I see what you're saying. Okay, let's think about the NBA real quick. Before in the NBA, if you think about, if you think about the video game NBA, if anyone played it, in the past, you had like, LeBron James, right? And then there was passing, shooting, speed, stamina, and stuff like that. And, in
Yep.
this new NBA world, to be successful, the three-pointers is way more important, right? And maybe like the shooting technique, because it's longer range, is way more important than, let's say, defensiveness and like, being strong, right? So it's been a
Yep.
change in the game of basketball, probably over the last, Steph Curry was the person probably that introduced that
Yeah.
change. So you need to kind of understand what are the different spikes, if you think about a spider web, that you can have as an athlete. And in the same case, you're an athlete at work, to some extent.
Yeah.
And so how can we understand which of those we should?
Well, and I think going back to that example, it's a great one because even let's say, and I think this is where we maybe just stopped before, we would say stamina, speed, strength, 3-point shooting ability. And we're
Mhm,
like, I don't know, so one, there was the weights and measures on that of,
mhm,
well, we were discovering we need more in the 3-point shooting than we did over here before. So some of it is that weights and measures. Some of it then is going, okay, 3-point shooting, what actually makes you a good 3-point
like
shooter?
weird.
Do we
Yeah,
really know?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because maybe we don't. Maybe we just go, well, you've sunk a lot of them, but do we really understand the mechanics of what kind of exercises does someone do to get
Mm,
better at shooting 3-point? What kind of defensive positioning do they need to know to be able to put themselves in a place to take more 3-point shots? How do we change the team dynamics to actually
mm,
optimize more 3-point shooting than we used to, where, getting in and dunking it might have been more? That kind of complex architecture, we have not ever had to deconstruct knowledge work, especially down to that level. Now, we did in manufacturing and some of those types of jobs because was robotics came in, we had to really understand this stuff. But now we're doing this in a space that historically we just kind of went, you know how to shoot a 3-pointer.
mm,
But now we realize actually we don't know what goes into the mechanics of that. And we need to take the time to deeply understand that so that we also can go, what part of shooting a 3-pointer can AI do? Because it's fine for it to do it. And
mm,
what part of shooting a 3-pointer do we not want AI doing? Because if it does it, it's going to make things exponentially worse.
mm. No, I like that. I like that. It's actually, the level deeper, right? And understanding. And this is where maybe like this operations, this high level piece comes in, in order to understand, why a certain response. Let's think about just like, customer support or IT support. There are certain responses that are good to customers and employees, others that are not. Why is that? Is it the character length? Is it the paragraphs? Is it the use of an emoji? Is it the tone? Is it like what makes things good and not good? And once we know what
Yep.
good means, right? And this like kind of basically you have a spider web, you go into one and then you create another spider web, you know,
Yes.
within that skill. Once we understand this, like how can we then optimize for it? I like that. I like that a
Yeah.
lot.
Well, and I think this goes back to our discussion of where people are concerned about some of this transformation happening and they're going, what's left for us? To me, it's like, well, we just actually get to keep going into deeper levels of complexity than we've ever had to deal with before, because before we only had so much capacity. It was like, well, this is as far as we can go because we only have this much time and resources, and we can't actually go beneath the surface of that. Now we have greater capacity. We can go to a deeper level of complexity. But again, it's a shift in mindset and it's a shift in work.
Yeah, I agree. By the way, this is but scary a little bit if you think about it. Is
It
that
is.
not just like it's daunting, not the AI piece, but freaking hell,
It's overwhelming.
it's never ending. Like we've won the Super Bowl, but now suddenly there's a Super Bowl plus, right? And
Right.
it'll require us to work even harder. Now we're not playing against the Chiefs or the Niners. Now we're playing against robots, right? And it's
Right.
it's it's kind of it'll force us to think very deeply, and I think we as humans will um yeah, if you think about it, like in the past, even if setting up a website, it was simple, SEO and stuff like that. There were like kind of best practices. Now we need to go a level deeper, and we're like, oh shit, this is daunting. This is daunting. We have new
Yeah.
capabilities. We don't need to do it anymore. The things that is tried and true. We need to explore new waters, and exploring new waters is always, little has some uneasiness to it.
Yeah. But I think going back to it, and this might be a natural transition point for us to talk about, what can we do to get there? Because I agree with you. And I think this is where, I don't know about you, but a number of the conversations that I have with people, there is almost a fatigue that people are carrying with them right now, where they're just kind of like, I'm tired. I'm exhausted because of what you just said. I see this and it's like, I just won the Super Bowl and now I've got to prepare for Super Bowl plus because winning the Super Bowl it's not even going to be relevant anymore. Winning the Super Bowl is going to be like, no big deal now. Now you got to be good at this. And so there is just this sense of one, people don't know what to do. And then they look at the reality that it's like, wow, that feels like a lot. So I think about that for the space you're in as I think about apps and this digital noise, the apocalypse of this stuff. I know just even being at GE, GE comes to mind specifically for this. When I was at GE, and I'll have a point of view on this, but I'm curious your take. I remember I got tasked with help simplify the architecture, which on the surface sounds like, yeah, sure, okay, let's do it. And then you get in and you're like, we've got 17 enterprise systems doing the exact same thing. And like, what? And we're trying to figure out where these things are and who has them and how to get down to this and how to bring people along for the ride and all this stuff. And I can see where a lot of people would just go, screw it. That just sounds like too much. But like the old adage says, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. As you lean in and help people with this, where do you see people starting? Like, what are some things that you've seen where you go, hey, I get it's overwhelming. I get it may be absolute chaos, but these are some baby steps that you can start taking to actually get you on the right path.
Yeah. Here's there are many different ones, but let me give you an example of customer support and then also of IT because I'm more well versed in IT. Where IT analysts are becoming more and more engineers, right? And
Okay.
it's quite daunting because like freaking hell, I need to know Python, right? And I need to build scripts. I didn't go to computer science school. How should I know that, right? And then I would say it's getting easier and easier because let's say you want to build a script for um, automating the account creation for Salesforce, or if you want to kind of make password reset self-service, you can literally use ChatGPT and build a script, with ChatGPT, right? You don't need to go anymore, watch those long YouTube videos.
Yeah, watch 900 YouTube
Yeah,
videos and search
exactly.
Reddit and like
You
all
know.
this stuff to try and be like, I'm trying to figure out how to, and you can only find the one that's like 80% of what you're trying to do, and then you're trying to troubleshoot the rest.
Exactly. And then look at, let's say it's like overflow, and then you see like, oh, that's semi-relevant. So let me change this. So, listen, like what I would do is like, I would pick an automation challenge, or look at all your IT tickets and see what's the most frequent IT ticket that's coming out, the top 10. In fact, you can even download all your IT tickets and upload it into ChatGPT and create a report. Let's start with that, right?
Okay.
Download all your IT tickets from Jira, upload it into like an AI, right? And kind of, I mean, might be a little, I'm not sure whether you're allowed to do that, but if so, if so,
Copilot. There you go. You're on
exactly.
Office 365. So do Copilot or wait for Gemini. Gemini, if you're on the G Suite.
In Google, exactly. So you upload it, and maybe it's just like creating a report for your executive saying like, hey, I looked through our tickets in the last 365 days. Here's the trends that I'm seeing. Here's our time to resolution. And here's a proposal. It can start with that, even to a manager. Start with a report to a manager and use AI with that. Then the next step would be, okay, now you've identified what the biggest challenges are. Maybe you can do some interviews with certain people and then pick one automation challenge. Okay, I want to automate this task. All right, get an engineer, ask them for support, right? And then build out an initial script, So those are kind of the small steps, the report creation or some simple scripting. That's how you can start, I would say.
Okay.
What do you think?
What I love about that, and I'll unpack it in kind of like learning speak, to just really help
please
break
do.
it
Like
down.
you're the expert actually on that side.
No, yeah, right. But what I love about that is one of the things that I often see is we get overwhelmed with these problems where it's just like, there's so many. And what you hit on there first is break it down and simplify it first. I think going back to this whole thing of oftentimes we feel like, well, we just got to solve everything, and prioritization and contextual understanding are two of the most important things that you can do to make things manageable. Because the reality is you can't solve everything. You don't have the time or the resources, regardless of how supercharged AI is. You just don't. Because if you try and chase them all, you're not going to do it well. And again, being able to use AI as a helper in that, because again, to your point, you could be like, well, now I got to download this thing. I got to write a bunch of VLOOKUPs. I got to write a bunch of all this other stuff. That could feel overwhelming versus going, hey, I consider AI a brilliant intern. That's what I think of it as. It's like that person that's next to you that's super smart and can do literally anything, but they have no context for anything. They don't understand what they're doing. They're just like, you tell me and I'll do it. But if you don't give me enough detail, I'm going to screw it up. And what you described is, here's what I'm trying to do. Look at all this data. Help me understand what kind of patterns or what are the biggest problems that you're seeing in there. And not that you just take it and copy and paste it on a PowerPoint slide, but you look at it, you think about it. And to your point, go dig into it, go ask around, go find out that context, because AI doesn't have context. So it can't understand. And so this way you can go, I'm going to validate this and I'm going to prioritize this down. And then I'm going to use my critical thinking skills to say, where do I believe we can make the biggest impact with people? And everything you described in there, and I think this is my advice to people in anything, the interpersonal relationships that you have and your interpersonal skills are going to be 1,000 times more important than they've ever been in the past. Because everything you described is, you can't get that context. You can't present to those stakeholders. You can't do all that if you don't know how to influence and build strong relationships. And I think that shows people, hey, you're never going to know where to start if you don't take the time prioritizing and figuring out what that is, and then step forward with it. And maybe it'll work. Maybe it'll blow up in your face. But the good news is you've got technology right alongside. Even if it blows up, you're like, well, we're just going to try this again. What is option 2? What do we think about that? And I think you can help break it down into much more step-by-step guidance.
No, I agree. I mean, like if anyone that listened here can take something out of it is maybe if you're more of a leader, figure out hot problem that you're trying to solve and give your team like, a data analysis task where they can leverage maybe AI to kind of help them come to a conclusion even faster. Or if you are more on the management or IC side, what's a burning problem that your company has, and we could use data that you have at hand, whether it's Slack messages, Teams messages, tickets, where you could kind of create an interesting report. It can be a small step. It can be a 3-hour exercise, but it's kind of a great way to kind of, get into this higher level thinking with the use of this today's technology.
What I love about the example you just gave there, I think is some wise words for leaders in this, in that you're also encouraging good team dynamics here. Whereas a leader, instead of going, I have to figure all this out, actually engage and empower your teams to do it. Go, here's the problem I'm trying to solve. You know the context and the details better than I do. I'm actually curious what you come up with this, and work together as a team on that. And that can be extremely empowering. And also, as I think about all your employees, so if you're a leader, all your employees are wondering what their relevance is and what their future looks like in this AI world. By doing what you just described, you're also modeling for them, this is the future of where we're going. This is the opportunity to start doing some of these things.
And even as a peer, you can say, imagine you are a systems engineer and you need to fix, multiple and crazy problems. And then what are the problems that are a little simpler? And can you enable, let's say, a systems analyst, right, to say like, hey, I actually want to invest in you. Everyone, in order to grow in your career, you need to become a good mentor. That's your path to either IC leadership. As an IC leader, you need to be one that can enable people, or management. Both is the same, right? Whether you go with the staff route or management route. So I think about what is the hard problem that you need to solve. Is there a subset of a problem where you can mentor other people with the use of like, the new technologies, so that, you can help them advance, and also like kind of remove a ton of that, work from your shoulders to someone else. So, that's, whether you're a manager, leader, or even like just like a peer, I think you can enable others.
What I really like about you bringing that point up is, as I look at where things are in the workforce right now, we're at a bit of a crisis moment right now, where we've got an older generation that's about to walk out with a whole bunch of intellectual capital and context and history and all this stuff that they understand. And you've got a new generation of people coming in who are walking into a world where things are moving super fast, and there's not as much room for them to learn those foundational pieces like you used to. It's like you're automatically expected to kind of be operating up here. And this is really an opportunity to say, hey, connect these people together, because if you do this right, you can give someone who's a little more junior, who maybe doesn't have those contextual skills, opportunity to do this under the guidance and wisdom of somebody who has that contextual piece, and you can learn off of each other. But it also builds you an upskilling plan for the younger generation who's going, I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't even know how I'm going to connect the dots between where I am today and where I need to be tomorrow.
Yep, agreed. Plus one, plus wanting that. Plus one.
So, final question for you. I'm curious. It's a double barrel question. What is something that you're most excited about with where things are going? And what is something that you look at and you go, I'm nervous about where this is going?
In general, I'm a techno optimist, right?
Yeah.
And techno optimist means, so think about this. Even if we have less work, think about like 50 years ago, we worked 60 hours a week or something like that. Right now, we work 38.5, right? Thinking that in 10 years from now, maybe we might just work 30 hours a week, right? On average, right? So that's pretty cool, right? So even though like, things might get rationalized a little bit, you'll become more productive, right? There are more and more 4-hour work weeks and stuff coming up. So I think just like AI will help us do more with less, and also what we talked about previously, do more, strategic work.
Important work. Make work better.
Exactly. That's what I'm excited about. Not like kind of, corporate America, you're in your cubicle and doing the same thing every day, right? Yeah. Now, what I'm a little worried about is, dude, like this is a massive shift. So like, how will education keep up with that, right? Think about, just like, how we are learning, teaching, software engineering in school, right? Like education is usually like the very slow to adapt. And I'm just like not sure whether we're setting up, everyone with all this change. Like how fast will we be able to adapt how we educate people, right? To do that thing. So that's like what a little bit what I'm worried about, and I don't have like a good answer to that, to be honest.
Okay. Okay. No, it's a legitimate concern. And again, I think it goes back to there's a lot, not only just in education, but just in general, our tendency, and this goes back to one of the very first things you said in the beginning, our comfort zone and our tendency is to hold on to what we've always done and kind of stick with it and go, I don't want to change. I'm going to stay here. And the pressure and the stakes, I think, have never been higher of saying, this is not the time to do that. Yet, at the same time, I think we have to do it with wisdom and discernment, because I do see some of this. I tend to be a tech optimist, but there are certain areas where I go, we're playing fast and loose with things we don't know what we're messing with.
Yeah.
And we aren't taking the time to do that higher order work of, yes, I agree education needs to change, but let's not just suddenly throw AI at everybody and go, here, we're just going to streamline degree programs and pump them out faster. Because I'm like, well, have we really thought about what it is people need to prepare them for it? And I know you would
Oh
agree
wait,
with
I need
that,
to
but
say
I
one.
think that's the
I
point where
need
it's
to
like,
say
we
one
got
more
to
thing.
think.
I
Yeah,
know
go for it.
we're at the end of this, but
No, we're good.
there's this cool book called Range, if anyone wants to read it.
Okay.
So I read two books recently. One is called the Andrej Agassi, biography, where Andrej
Okay.
Agassi actually hated tennis, but he did the same thing his dad forced him. And then at the end, with 16, he was like, I'm not good at anything else, so let me just do it. And he became one of the greatest in the sport.
Okay.
Right. But what Range actually says is the more complex a task, which is golf is the least complex, right? Let's say, tennis is a little more complex. Football or soccer is even more complex because you have like multiple people, and business is the most complex ever, right? Because like there's no path to success, right? The
No.
more
And you're
complex
dealing with people.
you're dealing with people, the more complex a task is, the more range you need. So there's a lot of research when it comes to like people that have different types of experience, right?
Okay.
So more range, right? That they are usually more successful in their jobs, right? Or also in soccer, right? Um, and what I'm trying to say with that is like, education is maybe not about like, hey, how can I use this new tooling? It's going to be like even more important to train people to, creativity is kind of connecting dots, or creativity is thinking, on a higher order level. So it's going to be even more important, to educate on critical thinking rather than, oh, software engineering is so simple, right? Coding something up is simple, right?
It's simple. Right.
The hard part is like, what is the right architecture?
Yes.
Like what is the business impact that this will have? Depending on whether this is an internal tool, external tool, but a more senior person is interacting with this, or junior person, right? It all changes it. So like, I do think that will become even more important.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to what I was saying before, where now is the time where we need to take the time to slow down and deconstruct this stuff and deeply understand what we're doing so we can make the right moves. Because if we make the right moves, I'm extremely optimistic about the future. Where I get a little concerned is when I'm like, we're playing fast and loose with things and we're not taking the time to be thoughtful and discerning with what we're doing, or we're assuming we know more than we do. Because the reality is, honestly, the more I learn, the more I realize I actually don't know anything.
That's true.
And so it's just like really taking the time to go, I want to make sure I know what I'm doing before I make these critical decisions.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
Well, Andre, this has been so much fun. I thoroughly have enjoyed our discussion. And I hope everybody who listens or watches this, I hope you share the same optimism we have about this future, because I truly, and you as well, I think are very optimistic about where we can go, while at the same time recognizing There's some hard work. There's some big challenges. There's some really hard things ahead, but that doesn't mean that it's not exciting if we do it right and if we embrace the right approach. So
Mhm.
thank you for making the time and for joining me today. This was super fun.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. As always, feel free to reach out, send any other messages that you have. And if you don't catch the whole thing, although if you're making it this far, you've already caught it, be sure to subscribe to the Substack where you can kind of hear my post reflections on the conversation. And with that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will see you on the other side.